Jimmy at the Crossroads. I always like to have spirited discussions with folks with whom we disagree. Michael Hiltzik is a columnist at the LA Times and a Pulitzer Prize winner. Is always one of my favorite guys to spar with, and he joins us now once again here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Michael, sir, good morning. Welcome back.
Good morning to you.
Good to have you. So were you able to hear my...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, I can hear you. I can hear you just fine. So how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Everybody in my household, including the dogs, is healthy. We're functioning pretty well.
That's what you can ask for sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit here. You seem to be, well, tell me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I've been reading some of your columns. What is the full scope of your overall view of the reopening of America right now, Michael Hiltzik?
Well, I think it's proper to reopen to some extent because we've learned a lot about the nature of this contagion, the nature of this pandemic. So we know what's relatively safe and we know what's unsafe. These are things we didn't know at the outset. And as I've written, the real reason that we needed a very thorough lockdown is we didn't know and we were making no efforts to find out. It's a shame of this country and of this government that we failed the test of keeping the population, keeping the public health strong, which is having adequate testing and adequate analysis. We still don't have that, and we're how many months into this? That's a failing of government. And frankly, it's a failing of the federal government because we knew from the outset that individuals could not handle this sort of cost or the comprehensive testing that we needed. So that's that. But as I said, we've learned, we know what's safe, we know what other measures are wise to take when people are out and about. We still need to have social distancing. We should all be wearing masks when we are out. This is not a political statement. It's not a partisan issue. It's basic public health, and it's basic care for your fellow residents. You may have had a negative virus test this morning or yesterday. You still don't know. First of all, you don't know if the test is accurate. And you don't know that you haven't gotten infected since that test was taken. And since we know that this virus is infectious even before anybody knows that they've got it, it's important that we all take these measures just for the sake of our friends and fellows and people that we meet and pass on the street.
Well, and
sure. Some reopening is reasonable, but we do not know enough in really almost any state about what the real risks are.
So talk to me about when you say some reopening is reasonable. What do you mean by some?
Well, I think it's reasonable to have to open outdoor recreational activities, especially if they can be done with people keeping a reasonable distance. In some states, going to the beach under some circumstances is fine. I think it's. I think we know that the level of infectious and the risk of catching the virus is greater when you are indoors, and when you're indoors in a given place for a longer period of time and in close quarters. And that means that, a restaurant meal is riskier than a run outside in a park. So we need to take all these things into consideration, and then I think we can relax some of the rules. But we didn't know this at the outset, and we didn't make any effort, as I said, to find out. And that's why we're still in this fix.
Well, when you say to find out, what exactly do you mean? Like, how would we find out?
Look, the countries that had most success in suppressing contagion are the countries that went right in at the very beginning with thorough testing so that they would know, first of all, they would know who had the virus, and they would know who was at risk, and they would know where the hotspots were and what the nature of those hotspots were. We are still not doing that. It's unbelievable that we're not doing that yet. This is, I keep hearing that this is the richest and most technologically advanced country in the world. The fact that we're not doing it is, as I said, it's shameful.
Michael Hiltzik, again, our guest from the LA Times. When it comes to the testing, I mean, I think one of the problems is that in the beginning, you did have one test that the FDA had put out, or whether the CDC had put out, one test that was approved. It was woefully defective, and it took some time to get the regulations dealt with in order to allow for more tests to go about. So I think we got off to a more difficult start in terms of testing from the beginning, particularly because of a failure of government when it comes to that regulatory regime. As for coming up in the succeeding weeks, I think things have gotten remarkably better given the fact that here in this country, we have, 350 million people. It is a massive undertaking, and we have had millions of tests in the United States of America and millions more coming about. And so while I think that it is important to increase that, and I agree with you that we haven't done a good enough job in that regard, I don't think that the idea that government can somehow stimulate the increase in the testing adequately, or that we should be waiting months, potentially more, in order for tests to be ramped up to the way that they should be, is appropriate, is right, and I just don't have trust in government to handle that in the first place. So I'm not surprised by a failure in that regard.
I think you're dead wrong on that on a number of counts. First of all, we have the technology, and we always have, to roll out these tests. The CDC rolled out a bad test. The WHO had a good test. The CDC, or federal government, refused it. States and labs had good tests. Federal government refused to let them use it. Other countries, including Canada, had tests ready. South Korea had tests ready. Taiwan had tests ready. This was not rocket science. We knew, and we knew even going into this pandemic, that tests would be the number one task. The fact that we didn't do it, that's on the government. The reason it didn't do it isn't because it didn't know how, or the technology wasn't available. It did know how, and the technology was available.
Well,
but
no,
it
Michael,
chose to sit on its butt instead of rolling it out.
In the beginning, the problem was the CDC had one test.
We have not improved. We're not where we need to be.
Well, we may not be where we should be, but we are absolutely better than where we were for sure. And when it comes to that early part of the test, though, there was only one test that the CDC allowed, Michael. So if the CDC initially offers one test and only allows one test, and it's a defective test, I wholeheartedly agree with you that that is a failure of government not meeting the challenge in the beginning. For sure, in terms of your point about ramping up and not being ready, it's because the CDC only allowed one test to go out there, and that was a defective test. But let's go to the reopening question here, because in my view, I think we're at a point where, yes, we do have a lot more understanding and knowledge about this virus, certain things that we should be doing as far as precautions. How are we not at a point where we can trust the majority of people? Yes, there are going to be some people who will not follow those regulations or suggestions and what have you. That's always going to happen in a free society. People will sometimes take undue risks that they shouldn't. But how come we cannot start trusting now the people of this country and do a wider scale reopening with social distancing measures in place instead of a piecemeal, let's just do this group and this type of business and this and that, and slow the ability for people to get back to life?
Well, all right. Let me take those points, and I'm not sure it's in the same order that you stated them. We can trust most people. We can trust most people, and we do trust most people. When I go out on the street, I see almost everybody wearing a mask. But the fact that, whatever percent, 5% of people are not wearing masks and are arrogant about it, that's not simply a 5% risk. That's a major risk, because they can infect a lot more people. That's the whole point of public health, is that you want everybody to be healthy, not just for themselves, but for yourself, because an unhealthy person or a person who takes risk that he or she says, well, I'm just risking myself, that's wrong and it's stupid and it's moronic. They're not just risking themselves, they're risking everybody else. So we still need to have rules in place and social practices in place that protect everybody and protect them from the idiots out there who think that it's that they're making a political statement, or they're standing up to freedom. It's freedom to harm everybody else. And I'm fully in sympathy with businesses that say, if you're not wearing a mask, you're not getting in the door. If you're not wearing a mask, we're not letting you check out your merchandise, and we're thrown out of these premises because you are risking the other shoppers, you are risking the employees who we've spent a lot of money to protect.
Yeah.
And you're just being an idiot, and
I made that point
and
before.
I would use a word that I don't want to use on your show, but we know what these people are.
Let me agree with you right there for a moment, Michael Hiltzik, which is, I'm not a believer that government should require the masks, but I think that if any business tells a customer you're not allowed in here, whether by law or by their own choice, they have that right as a business, and they ought to have that right. And clearly it's a good precaution for business owners to say, we're making this sort of restriction. And I said that in my opening monologue at the top. I said, look, if you go into business, don't throw a fit at the business owner or just the worker who's telling you, I'm sorry, you can't come in here, because whether by law or by our own choice, we're not letting customers in without a mask. I mean, I think it's asinine to be just a jerk that way and mistreat people when they're just doing what they think they need to do or should do.
Let me make another point here, which I think is important when you talk about reopening, because this is a point I've written about a few times now. The government can't dictate reopening. I mean, it can, in certain contexts, and for businesses that don't care much about their employees. The only entities that can dictate reopening are patrons and customers. And if I'm into a business establishment and I see a lot of people not wearing masks, I leave. I'm not going to do business there because I'm taking my life in my hands. And that's, I think, what's happening. If you look at the figures on restaurant reservations and restaurant orders in the states that have gone whole hog for reopening, you are not seeing 100% of that business coming back. In fact, you're in every state, you're barely seeing 20% of that business coming back. And one of the reasons is that the average consumer isn't convinced that government or business has made it safe enough to go back to the old ways. So the fact is that rules like, you have to wear a mask, rules like you have to keep your distance, that's good for business, because without it, customers aren't going to walk in the door. I mean, sensible customers are going to walk in the door. And if a business just wants to serve the idiots who they're taking a stand by not wearing a mask, those businesses are going to go out of business because it's a small proportion of the customer base.
But that actually, I think that underscores the justification for reopening, because I think most businesses, even without a law in place, will say, we need you for the time being to come in with a mask, to keep social distancing. You'll still have stores doing that sort of thing. When you go to Walmart or Target, they're going to have the distance markers and so forth. And I think they're going to take those precautions. And over time, people will feel more comfortable getting out there. But if we have restrictions where you're saying, no, you can't go to these types of places, or you're going to be arrested if you go to a gym in New Jersey, because even though you're wearing a mask and so forth, let people and businesses make those decisions. And I think, going to your point, that they're going to be smart about it. But I want to play a clip here in cut 4, because we're starting to get low on time, Michael Hiltzik. This is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida yesterday talking about the tremendous success that they've had in his state at addressing this virus without some of the steps taken by your state of California or New York State.
Our data is available. Our data is transparent. In fact, Dr. Birx has talked multiple times about how Florida has the absolute best data. So any insinuation otherwise is just typical partisan narrative trying to be spun. And part of the reason is that because you got a lot of people in your profession who waxed poetically for weeks and weeks about how Florida was going to be just like New York. Wait 2 weeks, Florida's going to be next. Just like Italy, wait 2 weeks. Well, hell, we're 8 weeks away from that, and it hasn't happened. Not only do we have a lower death rate, well, we have way lower deaths generally, we have a lower death rate than the Acela Corridor, D.C., everyone up there. We have a lower death rate than the Midwest, Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. But even in our region, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida has the lower death rate. And I was the #1 landing spot from tens of thousands of people leaving the #1 hot zone in the world to come to my state. So we've succeeded, and I think that people just don't want to recognize it because it challenges their narrative, it challenges their assumption, so they got to try to find a boogeyman. Maybe it's that there are black helicopters circling the Department of Health. If you believe that, I got a bridge in Brooklyn I'd like to sell you.
Last question.
Now I have to say, I really was impressed by Ron DeSantis' remarks there, as you can imagine.
All right,
I would
let me respond to that.
But I do want to compare that to New York, where talking about a failure of government. You had a major play on the part of Governor Cuomo to keep people or put people into nursing homes where 20% of their deaths, of the 24,000 deaths in New York, ended up happening in nursing homes. And here in Colorado, where I am, 57%, where we've had stay-at-home order, 57% of those deaths ended up being in nursing homes. Go on.
All right. Let me just say, I'm also impressed by Governor DeSantis. I'm impressed that he's a moron and a liar. All right. Now, here he is. He's standing there, bragging about the state of Florida. He's shouting. He's not wearing a mask. He's about 1.5 feet from the Vice President of the United States, who's also acting idiotically. If DeSantis happens to be, and we don't know that he is or isn't, happens to be infected, he's now just infected the vice president, and he's put the reporters who he was yelling at great risk. He's an idiot. The fact is, not only does he not know what the level of infection is in his own state, but he fired the statistician who was in charge of trying to put those numbers together. So don't tell me that DeSantis knows anything.
Very thorough explanations about the firing of that
figures
individual.
from Florida are not reliable. And not only that, but the reopening, what we do know is that the level of infection lags reopenings by several weeks. So the consequences of his half-assed policies aren't going to be known until sometime in June. And then maybe he'll be able to brag, but I sort of doubt it. He's an idiot, he's a liar, and if you're impressed by that, then that's just sad.
Well, you know what, Michael? I think, first of all, when it comes to the firing of that statistician, as you said, he explained that, and I wish I had the clip, but I didn't pull that yesterday.
He lied
very
about
thoroughly, very thoroughly. I disagree
yeah.
with you that he's a liar. I don't think that what he's presented at all is remotely untruthful. I think it's exactly accurate.
Well, his statistics
but let me ask
so
you,
that makes him a liar.
I have to run here, but I want to ask you one more question, because our next guest, we're going to be talking about the idea of bailing out states that have been dealing with the financial strain of this coronavirus. You have people like my next guest who argue we should not do that. What is your take on state bailouts, real quickly, Michael Hiltzik?
Well, if you want to pump up the unemployment rate even higher than it is, then don't bail out the states, because they're going to end up firing police officers and firemen and teachers and professors. So yeah, if you want more people to be out of work, then sure, then cop an attitude about states, not deserving any money. Let me just remind you once again that the #1 state in taking money from the federal government and needing money from the federal government is Mitch McConnell's state, and that's Kentucky. It's #1 as a ward of the federal government in this whole country. So when he boasts about how he's not going to help blues, the fact of the matter is the state that he's going to hurt the most is his red state.
One final question, actually, for you, because I see it looks like we both have gotten haircuts. I remember last time you were wearing a hat and everything.
I have not gotten it.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. Well,
No,
unfortunately, I was wondering because it looked a little like you'd gotten it trimmed since then. Okay, well, I got a haircut, and I got a haircut just a few days after the possibility came open. And I wanted to say this, that when I went there, they said, you have to wear a mask. They took my temperature as well, all well and good. I got in there. did the thing with the haircut, and she had the mask on, and we were talking. And I asked the stylist, I said, do you feel comfortable being here? She was relieved to be back to work, but do you feel comfortable? And she said, I think the precautions we're taking are exactly right. We're making sure that everything is absolutely clean. And we are wearing masks. We're doing all of these different steps that are necessary to make me feel comfortable, that I'm also ensuring that my customers are feeling comfortable. What do you make of that, Michael Hiltzik? Is it time okay for salons to be back open? Or would you say that I shouldn't have been able to legally get a haircut?
Well, look, it's up to you. It's really not up to the stylist to decide, who's comfortable. But the fact is that, hair cutting, hairstyling is a close quarter activity. So yeah, I think you're going to have to be I'm certainly going to have to be much more comfortable than I am at the moment going to get my haircut.
And I think comfort is what should be the determining factor, not government, in whether or not you get your haircut. Michael Hiltzik.
Well, you can be comfortable and you can be wrong.
That's true. Fair enough. But hey, I think that I would trust an individual to potentially be wrong more than the government impacting millions more to be wrong. But Michael Hiltzik, always great to spar with you, my friend.
Individuals don't do anything.
I understand. Always great to spar with you, my friend. Thanks for joining us on Jimmy at the Crossroads.
All right. Good luck.
Michael Hiltzik, everybody, from the Los Angeles Times, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks for watching this clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. You do not want to miss a minute of engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel, and you'll be sure to catch our live broadcast. I appreciate your support.
I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.